So I am recording this for the sake of the great-granddaughter, of the subject of my presentation today. I'm not going to talk about his name just yet, but this is about some research I did researching the history of Holy Cross Warda. They just celebrated their 150th anniversary this year, so we're going to talk about somebody that was involved in their history and that person's impact on winds and the impact of winds on that person. Now, when you get to history, there's a lot of background, and unfortunately, I can't get into all of it. I'm going to have to cut some of it because Chelsea told me I had to keep it to like 10 or 15 hours. Was that right, Richard? Or was that minutes? I think it was minutes, so we'll try not to go over 10 or 15 minutes. To start with, we'll go back a little bit. What year did the winds come to Texas on the Ben Nevis? 1854. All right, good. That's the only question I'll ask, I promise. One of the reasons that the Prussian winds left, not the Saxon winds so much, but one of the reasons the Prussian winds left is because they were not happy with the Prussian government's interference with matters of the state. The Prussian government said, hey, we've got this Reformed church, we've got this Lutheran church, let's all get along and you can all, be one church body. And y'all have to compromise a little bit here and there to make it work. Well, a certain segment of Lutherans said, no, we don't want to do that. We're not willing to compromise on our faith. We're going to stick with the Augsburg Confession, the Formula of Concord, and the other Lutheran confessions. And that group of Lutherans and Lutherans all over what's now Germany, we call them Old Lutherans often to denote their desire to stay true to the original Lutheran confessions. So that's one of the reasons they come over. They show up December of 1854. They're in Galveston, probably looking to see if there's a Lutheran church body of any sort here in Texas. Well, there is one. Founded 3 years earlier in 1851. It's the first evangelical Lutheran Synod of Texas. Not very big. They have a handful of pastors and congregations. One of them is in Galveston. One of them is in Houston. And as the winds move inland from Galveston to Houston to spend their winter, they meet the president of the first Evangelical Lutheran Synod of Texas, or the Texas Synod. His name is Pastor Casper Brown. He's the pastor of the congregation in Houston. He helps them through the winter. As you might imagine, he and Pastor Killian become friends. They're both pastors. They're both Lutheran pastors, of course. However, Pastor Killian does not want to, as you might expect, become associated with the Texas Synod. The reason why is although Pastor Brown is kind of cut from the same old Lutheran cloth as Pastor Killian, the Texas Synod is part of a larger national body. It's called the General Synod. Now, some of the regional Lutheran bodies that are part of the General Synod, some of them are more like the old Lutherans, but some of them are more like the Prussian Union, this Union church that Killian didn't want anything to do with. And so for that reason and others, Killian's not willing to be associated with them. And so he eventually associates with the Missouri Synod. Pastor Killian and Pastor Brown, actually, they remain friends to the end of Pastor Brown's life. He dies on October 14th, let me make sure I get this right, 1880, which was actually 143 years yesterday. But he doesn't want to be part of the Texas Synod. What does happen, as we know, they make their way to Serban, they get land here. There is, as you probably know, a little bit of a kerfuffle that involves a group of people withdrawing from Pastor Killian's congregation. They set up another Lutheran congregation called St. Peter's. That St. Peter's church actually affiliates with the Texas Synod. They get their pastor from there. And then the Texas Synod then intersects again with the history of the winds about 1870, 1873. There's another interpersonal conflict within Pastor Killian's congregation. It results in, it's kind of between teacher Leubner of the school and Carl Teinert, who was the cantor and organist. He had been a good friend of Pastor Killian up until this point. And So that results in what we call the Second St. Peter's Church of Servin, which affiliates with the Missouri Synod. We also end up with Trinity Lutheran Church in Fedor in 1871, and then Holy Cross in Warda, which Carl Tynert is involved with in 1873. Well, the folks at Holy Cross Warda, they want to be a Missouri Synod congregation. They actually call a pastor that's a Missouri Synod pastor in the area until the Synod says, hey, hold up. You know, we've got enough Missouri Synod pastors right here. Y'all can't have one. You need to work this out. And so at that point, Tynert and the other leaders of Holy Cross, they decide, well, our old Lutheran convictions are important, but we want to have our own congregation, so they go to the Texas Synod and get a pastor. That pastor's name is Edward Zapf, and he is pastor for about 10 months, until he unfortunately dies of a fever. Most unfortunately, he dies while his fiancée is on a train coming down here to meet him. So when she arrives, the delegation from Holy Cross meets her with the unfortunate news, which, gosh, that has to be just awful. And Holy Cross is without a pastor. The Texas Synod does not have another ordained pastor to give to Holy Cross here at this point. And this is when the subject of our presentation comes into the picture. In the 125th anniversary history of Holy Cross, it just mentions him in one line. He's kind of like, if you know Melchizedek in the Old Testament, he shows up in a verse, blesses Abram, and he's gone. You know, and the history reads that the Texas Synod, something to the effect of the Texas Synod, assigns an unordained candidate by the name of F. Jesse. The people at Holy Cross by this point are kind of not liking their Texas Synod choice. They probably didn't always like it anyway. And they try to convert him to becoming a Missouri Synod man. He refuses and they part ways. And that's all you see in the 125th anniversary history of Mr. Jesse, eventually Pastor Jesse. I wanted to find out more about F. Jesse, partly because when I moved to Texas, I joined St. Paul Lutheran Church in Austin, where there was a pastor, a longtime pastor by the name of Albert Jesse. And I thought, that's not a very common surname. They're probably related. Let me dig into this and see if I can find out. So, to give you a little backstory on Mr. Jesse, I had to find his full name, which is not fun because in the 19th and early 20th century, everybody just called everybody by their initial or initials. And it gets worse if you're a wife because you're just Mrs. F. Jesse. You know, I don't know what any of your initials are or your maiden name, and I have to dig it out. So it was a little easier for him. He is Frederick Edward Jesse. He was born on November 8, 1887 in Prussia. This is now part of Poland. He arrives in New Orleans on May 18, 1872, about 2 years before he intersects with the history of Holy Cross. And at some point, he becomes a ministerial candidate and has his brief assignment that doesn't work there. Well, interestingly enough, if you look at the minutes of the Texas Synod and Convention the next year after this, you'll see that they actually note that Pastor Jesse reported that the people at Holy Cross tried to make a Missouri Synod man out of him, and he manfully resisted their efforts. And then you'll see him in the history of a number of congregations in Texas. One of the ones I can think of off the top of my head, Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Pflugerville, is the church that he helped set up. And then he shows up again in 1888, about 14 years later. Pastor Gotthilf Birkman from Fedor writes that a man named F. Jesse, a pastor named F. Jesse, shows up at a pastor's conference up in Rose Hill. He notes that he professed correct doctrine, so he was in sympathy with the Missouri Synod, but apparently he doesn't join the Missouri Synod. If you go back to the history of the Texas Synod, what's happening is he and some other pastors are trying to get them to affiliate with a more conservative body that will be better able to give them Lutheran pastors. A couple of years later, that effort fails. He leaves the Texas Synod. He and some of his colleagues, some of them, including him, joined the Missouri Synod. So, did the people at Holy Cross play a huge part in him becoming a Missouri Synod pastor? Hard to say. But they probably, since he was only 2 years into Texas at that point, probably were the first major connection with Missouri Synod doctrine that he had, the first conversation that he had with people who were sympathetic to the Missouri Synod. So how does Jesse go on to impact the Missouri Synod? Well, he has two sons that go on to become Missouri Synod pastors. There's the Reverend Dr. Richard Jesse Sr. He serves churches in St. Louis and Detroit during his career. There's the Reverend Frederick William Carl, or FWC Jesse. He at one point was the assistant pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Thorndale, which is a heavily Windish congregation. He's also our president of Clifton Lutheran College in Clifton, Texas from 1909 to 1914, which has nothing to do with my family. It just happens to have that name. This college was set up by the Norwegian Synod and the Norwegian settlers up in Bosque County. And at that point, they were in fellowship with the Missouri Synod. They knew that the Missouri Synod's folks in Texas wanted to have a higher education institution closer to home. And they said, why don't you come and work with us with this college? So that worked out for a little while, until 1914, like I said. But besides being president of that college, being that it was in Texas, a number of Windish students got their higher education at Clifton College up near Dallas. And then after that, he goes on, he's the president of Concordia in Seward, Nebraska, before he retires from that and returns to the parish ministry. So besides that, he has three grandsons that become pastors. There's the Reverend Richard Jesse Jr., who serves congregations in Michigan and Ohio, and he also serves in numerous roles at the district and synod level. There is the Reverend Richard Albert Jesse, not Albert Jesse from St. Paul, Austin, but his brother, confusingly enough. He helps found St. Matthew's Lutheran Church in Houston. He also served as the Dean of Students at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis and the Dean of Concordia Senior College in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So certainly some Windish students were educated under his watch there. There's the Reverend Albert Frederick Jesse, who was also the son of FWC. He served a congregation in St. Louis, Missouri, before coming to St. Paul, Austin. And while he was pastor at St. Paul, Austin, he served as the Texas district president, served 5 terms as the vice president of the Texas district, and served at various other capacities at the district. And then this isn't so much a Lutheran thing, but just kind of a really interesting thing. That's how history intersects with people. So he also had another grandson whose name was Carl Jesse. He was a church musician. He ended up in Jasper, Alabama, where he helped found a college called Walker College. Margie's mother was educated at that college. So that's pretty cool. And if you believe what you read online, his ghost still haunts the administration building. So there's probably a lot more that we'll know, we can ever know here, until we get to talk to Pastor Jesse, or all the Pastor Jessies in heaven. But I just thought it's kind of cool how, this one little contact may have played a huge part in the education of lots of Windish students, and may have played a part in a change in the direction of his life. So that's all. Thank you.